Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for standing by. Welcome to the webinar today, brought to you by ComplyRight. Roundup of 2015 labor law posting changes, what do they mean for your business? Please note that during the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Tuesday, December 8th, 2015. My name is Stephanie Thomas, and I am your host today. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar, and welcome. I'd like to review a few housekeeping items before we begin. If you would like to ask a question, simply use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. You can ask questions at any time. If you have any audio trouble, please message us in the chat box and we will assist you. Please ensure your speakers are turned on with the volume up as well. Now I'm pleased to introduce you to our two speakers today, Ashley Kaplan and Raquel McDowell. Ashley is a senior employment law attorney for Poster Guard and has been practicing labor and employment law for almost 20 years. Ashley oversees the teams responsible for researching all the posting laws and developing Poster Guard services to meet our customers' diverse needs. Ashley has represented employers of all sizes in all areas of labor and employment law, including claims relating to civil rights, family leave issues, wage and hour matters, immigration, and breach of contract. Raquel McDowell is the employment law attorney for ComplyRight brand and is responsible for legal research and regularly monitors federal, state, and local laws to ensure legal compliance for all ComplyRight products. Before joining ComplyRight, she previously worked for the Internal Revenue Service in Washington, D.C. And without further ado, here's Ashley Kaplan. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Stephanie, and welcome everyone. The goal of today's webinar is to provide an overview of the labor law posting changes that occurred in 2015, as well as some of the trends that we've been monitoring over the past year that will continue to impact posting compliance into 2016. Staying on top of labor law posting changes is becoming more complex and difficult to manage over the years because more and more laws are being passed on the federal, state, and local level. On a local level, we're actually seeing so many new city and county ordinances coming out, so it's a lot to keep track of. And these laws are generally giving employees more protection in the workplace. And whenever there's a new law, a new employment law, there's a potential poster update or even a brand new poster that's being issued. So in 2015, legislatures on a federal, state, and local level passed dozens of new laws covering issues such as paid sick leave, minimum wage, pregnancy accommodation, safety in the workplace, and a lot more. And we're going to get into some of the details around these laws today. There were also some significant changes when it comes to federal contractor posting requirements, with a record number of mandatory changes in 2015 and even more that are still pending for 2016. So today we're going to give you an overview of the trends that we've seen develop over the year, and we're going to highlight some specific posting changes that you need to be aware of to stay in compliance, including federal, state, local, and the federal contractor posting changes. We're also going to go over a solution by Poster Guard that will help you stay ahead of the curve when it comes to posting compliance and managing all the posting requirements that apply to your business. So first, let's start with a basic understanding of the federal and state requirements, and then we're going to get into the specifics about what changed in 2015. So as I said before, today's posting compliance environment is more complex than ever. As most of you probably know, all employers in the U.S. have to post both federal and state employee notices. And depending on what state you're in, this can now add up to 21 individual employment law postings that have to be displayed on your walls. Out of this 21, 6 of these are the mandatory federal posters, and then there are up to 15 additional ones for state law compliance. Then on top of all this, there are additional posting requirements that might apply to you, that are required if you're in certain cities or counties, if you're a government contractor, and if you're in certain industries like healthcare or the restaurant business. There are some industries that actually have additional employee postings. Okay, we're going to start really quickly with the federal posting requirements. And the 6 mandatory federal posters are listed here on the slide. First, there's the anti-discrimination posting issued by the EEOC. Next, there's the FLSA posting, or Fair Labor Standards Act posting. And this one notifies employees about the minimum wage rate, overtime rules, and child labor laws. Then there's the OSHA posting, and this one highlights important provisions of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Next, there's the EPPA posting, which stands for the Employee Polygraph Protection Act. And this one lets employees and applicants know the rules around using lie detector tests in employment. And yes, this one is mandatory even if you don't use lie detector tests at all in your business. That's a question I get a lot. It seems odd that you would have to post that, but it is required for everyone. Next, there's the FMLA, the Family and Medical Leave Act posting. And this gives employees basic information about their eligibility for leave, what benefits they can expect, and of course your responsibilities as their employer. And then finally, there's USERRA, which stands for the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. And this notice covers reemployment or reinstatement after military leave, anti-discrimination provisions, and some issues around health insurance and benefits that are maintained during time off. While we're on the federal posting requirements, I want to go ahead and cover a posting change in 2015 that you might have heard about, and that is the change to the federal OSHA posting. In early 2015, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration changed its record-keeping regulations, and the new regulations went into effect on January 1st, 2015. And basically, the new regs expanded the list of severe injuries that all employers have to report to OSHA. The regulations clarified that employers have to report work-related fatalities to OSHA within 8 hours, and you have to report any work-related inpatient hospitalizations, amputations, or loss of an eye within 24 hours. There were some other changes in there as well, like the system used to determine which industries are exempt from the regular illness and injury reporting. And basically it's just, we've moved away now from the old SIC system for industry classification, and now it's based on the North American Industry Classification System, or the NAICS. So a few months after these new OSHA regs took effect, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration released a new version of the federal OSHA poster, and it really just incorporated a lot of the information that I just went over. The new poster came out in May 2015, and when it came out, a lot of businesses assumed that it was a mandatory update because the poster did have a lot of content changes. There were some major substantive changes to the poster. It wasn't just like a new look and feel like the last OSHA poster update that we saw. But through further research, we did confirm that this poster change was not a mandatory change, and employers were not required to replace their old versions of the posters. In fact, since then, OSHA has actually updated its website when you go to look for postings, and it now states very clearly that both versions of the poster are fully compliant. I think we have images here. Okay, this slide shows you just images of both versions of the poster, just so there's no confusion. And again, both of these versions are acceptable right now. So actually in 2015, there were no mandatory changes to any of the 6 federal postings that we went over. Now we do have a few federal poster changes that are pending for 2016, which we're going to go over on the next slide. And those are based on laws that have already passed, where the corresponding posters with those laws just haven't been updated yet with this new information. Also, before I go on, I just want to make sure, so no one's confused. There have also been some mandatory changes in 2015 to the federal contractor postings, which we're also going to go over today. But for now, we're still just talking about the federal posters that apply to everyone, not the federal contractor changes. Okay, so this slide highlights a few federal laws that have already been enacted, laws that make the corresponding posters outdated. And so they are expected to trigger mandatory poster updates in the coming months in order to get the new information onto the posters. And this can be really complicated when it comes to the timing of poster updates. I know this can be confusing. Typically, well actually it's really not typically, but in most cases, a law is passed and then the government updates the poster before the compliance deadline or the effective date of the law. So if a new law takes effect on January 1, in most cases that poster, the new poster will come out on or before January 1. But that is not always the case. Sometimes a law will go into effect and the government takes weeks or even months to catch up and get the new information onto the posters. And then in some cases you get the opposite. You get the poster way before the law even takes effect. So we've seen it all, and I know it can be confusing with the timing. So the bottom line is that the effective dates of the laws do not always coincide with the effective dates for the poster updates. So these are some that are delayed. The first one here on this slide is really based on two laws. And these laws affect primarily federal contractors, but the poster that's being updated is one that is for all employers, whether they have federal contracts or not. It's the EEO is the law poster. It was the first on the list on the previous slide, issued by the EEOC. And that's a poster that covers discrimination for employers in general, and then a small part of that poster addresses the federal contractor obligations. So the first law behind this poster change is older. It actually took effect in March 2014, and it essentially provided for expanded veteran protections in the workplace. And then the other law behind this EEOC poster update, it's the one that went into effect in April 2015, and that's the law that prohibits federal contractors from discriminating against someone based on sexual orientation or gender identity. In September 2015, recently, the OFCCP actually released a new mandatory poster for federal contractors with information about these two laws. We're going to get into that in a lot more detail in a moment. And it's considered a temporary supplement to this EEOC poster. But anyway, that new poster that was issued in September is mandatory for federal contractors, and it's a temporary posting that the OFCC put out while it continues to work on the final version of this EEOC poster. Actually, the OFCCP officially announced that it's working together with the EEOC to develop the new EEO is the law poster, and it is expected to be released in early 2016. So this is one that we're watching really closely, and it's just not clear yet whether the new version of the EEO is the law poster is going to be required for all employers or just federal contractors. So like I said, that's something that we're watching really closely. There's just no more information on that at this time. So the poster's coming. We're just not sure yet if it's just federal contractors or all employers that are going to have to post the new version. Next, on the FMLA poster, we're also expecting a change to the federal posting. And this is based on, in February 2015, the DOL revised the regs in terms of the definition of spouse under the Family and Medical Leave Act. And essentially, the regulations gave eligible employees in legal same-sex marriages the right to take FMLA leave to care for their spouse or covered family member, regardless of where they live. So even if at the time they were in a state that didn't recognize same-sex marriage. And of course, that was before the Supreme Court decision over the summer that legalized same-sex marriage in all states. So at the time, this was a major development when they were released. And the new FMLA regulations went into effect March 27, 2015. And the current version of the FMLA poster uses the term spouse, but it still hasn't been updated by the agency to incorporate the new regulations. So this is another change that we're expecting in early 2016. And then finally on this slide, we're also monitoring the anticipated changes to the Fair Labor Standards Act. On June 30th of this year, the DOL, the Department of Labor, issued proposed regulations that would drastically change the FLSA overtime exemptions. You've probably heard about this. There's been a lot of hype around this. One of the changes would be raising the salary threshold, the minimum salary requirement for someone to be considered exempt under white-collar exemptions, raising it from $455 a week to more than $900 a week. And that's like a 200% increase. That's why it's gotten so much attention. So right now it's still in the public comment period, and the final regulations are due. They're expected in the summer of 2016. So once that happens and the final regulations are published, then we'll know for sure whether the FLSA poster is getting updated as well, or even if there's going to be a new posting. By the way, I believe ComplyRight is going to be hosting another webinar in January dedicated to the upcoming trends and laws for 2016, like the legal landmines to watch out for. So all of these proposed changes that I've just talked about will be covered in a lot more depth in that webinar. So just let us know if you'd like more information about that event, and our host will follow up with you on that. You can just indicate that as a question, and she'll be sure to follow up with you. Okay. So now, moving on, we're going to talk about the laws and regulations that were passed on the state level that resulted in state poster changes in 2015. And as most of you probably know, in addition to displaying the set of 6 federal posters, you also have to post several state-issued employee notices at each posting site. Okay, before we jump into that, we have a quick poll question on the issue of state and local employment law in general. And the question for you is, true or false, states, cities, and counties can pass employee laws that are more generous than federal laws? So please take a moment to submit your responses. I know for those of you with locations in certain states or in cities with a lot of local legislation like San Francisco, you're probably well aware of the answer to this one. But we'll see how many of you are impacted by this. Okay, well, it appears that the majority of you are aware of this, over 80%. And the answer is true. States, cities, and counties can pass laws that are more generous than federal law. And this is something that we are seeing more and more of in the world of employment law. It applies as a general concept, but we're really seeing more and more of this when it comes to employment laws. We're basically seeing more and more state and local laws giving employees expanded protections beyond what federal law provides. And this is what triggers most of the poster changes that we're talking about today. So states and cities cannot make laws that are more restrictive for employees, but they certainly can and do pass laws that are more generous. Okay, so let's start with some basic information about state law posting compliance. There are about 370 different state-issued mandatory employee postings nationally. So if you have locations in every state, this is how many separate postings there are to keep track of today, about 370 different postings. And the state postings are issued by multiple state agencies and typically cover issues like workers' comp, unemployment insurance, state minimum wage rates, discrimination and fair employment, family and medical leave benefits like paid time off, and smoking in the workplace. We're even starting to see a lot of workplace postings on e-cigarettes and vaping in the workplace as well. And employers are required to post both state and federal postings even if they address the same topic and even if they provide conflicting information. A lot of times the information on the two posters will conflict. They basically contradict each other when you just glance at the posters. And that's because of what we just talked about with that poll question, where states have the right to pass their own laws giving employees more protection than provided by federal law. So this happens a lot with the minimum wage. Most states do have a higher minimum wage than under federal law. And we're also starting to see this a lot with family and medical leave laws that are more generous on a state and local level. They're more generous than the federal FMLA. So for example, we're seeing a lot of state and local laws that provide for more time off, more than 12 weeks. Some are providing for paid leave instead of unpaid leave, which you get under the FMLA. And we're also seeing these laws allow for leave for different kinds of absences beyond what's covered by the FMLA, things like parental leave for a child's school activities. So just remember, when two laws conflict, if you have a state and federal law that conflict, of course you have to follow the provisions that are the most beneficial to the employee. But in either case, you still have to post both posters. So in practice, you're following the more generous provisions, but you still have to post both posters. Okay, one thing that a lot of people are not so familiar with is that there isn't a one-stop shop for free government posters when it comes to all these state posters. All the different agencies do provide the posters, but there's not a central place where you can get all the posters you need for state and federal compliance. So it really takes quite a bit of know-how and resources to get everything you need. It's one thing if you just have one location to worry about, but for multi-state employers with locations that cross state lines, there's actually across the nation, the basic federal and state posters are issued by about 175 different agencies. And in any given state, in just one state, to manage posting compliance, to get the federal and state posters, an employer has to go to up to 9 different agencies just to get the mandatory posters. And for the most part, these agencies work independently. The various state agencies work independently. They don't have a work share agreement where one agency provides all the posters that the sister agencies require. In some cases, there are a couple of states that do a pretty good job of this, where the agencies try to help out, and you'll see some crossover on the agency's website where you'll see some posters that are issued and enforced by a different agency. But it's not a complete list, and there simply is not a one-stop shop where you can get all the federal and all the state posters you need for full compliance. This chart goes state by state, and in the first column on the left, it shows how many posters, how many individual posting notices are required for each state when you include your federal and state postings. And then in the second column on the right, it shows you how many different agencies are responsible for issuing those postings. So how many different agencies you have to go to get the postings. And this is just a good self-audit tool, so at a quick glance you can see how many postings you should have up on your walls. And it does get updated constantly. These numbers change all the time. So this was updated over the weekend, so it's accurate as of today. But as you can see, there are now several states that have 15 or more mandatory posters. And in fact, I think the smallest number of posters required on here is 9. So that's the minimum. Okay. Okay. Another piece that sort of adds to the complexity of posting compliance is keeping up with the rapid rate of change when the government issues new or updated posters and the old ones have to be changed out immediately to maintain ongoing compliance. Labor law posting requirements change frequently. They change all the time, and we've actually seen the rate of change increase to an all-time high over the past few years. Our legal team here at Poster Guard monitors and tracks all of these posting changes on a daily basis, and on average, we see about 150 state law posting changes a year. And then every time there's a posting change, our legal team has to review the underlying laws, the surrounding statutes and regulations to determine if it's a mandatory or a non-mandatory update. And at least half of the time, at least half of these changes do require a mandatory update or immediate replacement of the posters. And then another problem adding to the complexity of posting compliance is that the government agencies don't notify businesses when these posting changes occur. So this can be really difficult because the posting requirements and the notices of change or the updates can be buried on different agency website pages. And a lot of times the old posters will remain up and on active website links even though they're non-compliant. And there's no information about the poster having expired or being no longer compliant. It's still there, and it looks like a poster that would be good to download. So it makes it really confusing. And then sometimes the posting guidelines, whether it's mandatory, whether there are foreign language requirements, things like that, they can be buried in statutes or regulations or even case law. So it makes it difficult to find the changes, and then it's difficult to interpret whether they're mandatory or non-mandatory, and even difficult in a lot of cases to determine whether there are compliance deadlines for replacing the old ones with the new ones. Okay, so now we're going to highlight specific state law poster changes that we saw in 2015 and some of the trends that we expect to continue through 2016. Obviously, we're not going to be able to cover every single poster change that we saw in 2015. And by the way, there are still some trickling in before we close out the year. But we are going to highlight the major trends. And if you would like more information on your specific state or a particular poster change you're wondering about, just indicate that as a question, and we'll be sure to follow up with you after the presentation today. So, okay, now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Raquel McDowell. And I believe she's going to start with the trend having the biggest impact on posters, on state law posting, and that is minimum wage.
Thanks, Ashley. Okay, so jumping right in, we had several states increase their minimum wages in 2015 that resulted in poster changes. Here's a list of all the states and new minimum wage rates and effective dates. For the first time, Arkansas, Hawaii, Maryland, Nebraska, and West Virginia enacted laws to have their minimum wages above the federals of $7.25. And even though their minimum wage rates were already above the federals, Alaska, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, Rhode Island, and Vermont decided that workers still needed a boost and took action in 2015. Some of these increases were in accordance with the state's automatic consumer price index adjustment requirements. Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Missouri, Montana, New Jersey, Ohio, and Oregon saw automatic increases to their minimum wages because of this CPI increasing in 2015. And South Dakota and Washington also had increases that went into effect January 1st, 2015, but these states don't require minimum wage postings. Now, this slide here lists some more mandatory poster changes that are going into effect based on 2016 increases. This is the list of the increases where the new posters have already been released, and of course these are all mandatory poster updates. But there are also several states that have announced their minimum wage increases, but the new posters have not yet been released. This slide lists the states where minimum wage increases have been announced for 2016, but the posters have not been released yet. But of course, we're watching these closely, and we do expect most of them to become available within the next few weeks. As Ashley mentioned earlier, the OSHA updated their record-keeping requirements for work-related accidents and fatalities effective of January 1st, 2015. And because of this, several states, these states being Michigan, Minnesota, North Carolina, and Washington, also updated their state OSHA posters in 2015 to include the same changes. And again, all of these updates were mandatory. And again, as Ashley mentioned earlier, specifically the posters were updated to include the new OSHA employer reporting requirements for accidents and fatalities. And these updates say that an employer must report any work-related fatality within 8 hours and any work-related inpatient hospitalizations, work-related amputations, and any work-related loss of an eye within 24 hours. Now, as you can see, North Carolina released their new poster in sync with the January 2015 effective date for the new OSHA regulations, but the other three states were sort of delayed. But this is something we see pretty often with poster updates, so it's not unusual. So another trend we saw in 2015 was several states giving more protections to pregnant employees. Several federal laws already protect pregnant women, but even with all these laws, many states and cities are passing legislation targeting pregnancy discrimination, and they're also clarifying employer responsibilities to provide reasonable accommodations. These state laws require employers to give pregnant employees reasonable accommodations such as more or longer bathroom breaks, rest periods, light duty, job transfers, and like leave time and other accommodations. Actually, in 2015, the District of Columbia, Delaware, Illinois, and Rhode Island all had poster changes as a result of these new laws. The DC poster was updated in June. For Delaware and Illinois, though, the posters were required as of January 2015, and the Rhode Island poster was issued in August. One thing I wanted to point out about what's interesting about the DC poster is it is required to be posted in both English and Spanish, even if you have no Spanish-speaking employees, so that's important. So California also passed a pregnancy discrimination law that went into effect July 1st, 2015, but they have not updated the California FMLA pregnancy disability poster yet. But these changes made the regulations more closely aligned with the federal FMLA. So this is a law that already went into effect, and again, we are expecting the poster to be released any day now. So we are looking out for that. All right, so another trend that we've seen in recent years is states passing laws on paid sick leave. In 2014, only Connecticut and a few major cities had paid sick leave laws, but since then, there are now paid sick leave ordinances in major cities like Philadelphia and Jersey City, New Jersey. And in 2015, the states California and Massachusetts joined this list. In June 2015, the Massachusetts Earned Sick Time poster was released. Under this new law, which was effective July 1st, 2015, workers will get 1 paid hour of sick leaves for every 30 hours worked, with a maximum of 40 hours of sick leave per year. Employers are required to post this notice informing employees of their rights. Also in 2015, the California Paid Sick Leave poster was released based on a new law with an effective date of January 1st, 2015. This law requires employers to give employees, which also includes some part-time and temp employees, at least 3 paid sick days each year. Now, just to clarify, because this is a little confusing, this state's new paid sick leave law went into effect on January 1st, 2015, but the right for an employee to begin accruing and taking sick leave did not go into effect until July 1st, 2015. So again, I know that's kind of confusing, but again, the poster did have its mandatory change in January, even though most employers weren't affected until July. There's actually another pending change we're watching for this same poster based on a new law that went into effect July 13th, 2015, known as the Sick Pay Law. So we're expecting the updated California Paid Sick Leave poster to be released soon, and of course we're watching that. So these are just a few of the trends that impacted state law postings. There were several other state labor law changes in 2015, and even more are expected in 2016. We just don't have the time to review every single poster change right now, of course. But if you have any questions about the specific changes you've heard about here, or how will they impact your business, or maybe you have a question about a certain state or federal poster or anything, please submit your question using that box to the right of your screen, or you can send us an email and we'll get back to you with more information. Okay, so now I'm actually going to turn it back over to Ashley, and she is going to give you more information on the federal contractor posting requirements.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the laws and regulations that were passed in 2015 that have affected federal contractors. If you're a federal government contractor, there are now up to 12 additional posters that you have to display at your locations, and this is in addition to the state and federal posters that we've already been talking about. So I'm going to put up a list on the next slide of all the mandatory postings, but 2015 was a really busy year for federal contractor laws in general, but for federal contractor poster changes. There have actually already been 5 mandatory poster changes for federal contractors in 2015. And then there are also several pending changes that are due to be released in early 2016, which we're going to be going over. But before I get into detail about the changes, I just want to back up a little bit and talk about federal contractor posting requirements in general. This is something we get a lot of questions about. Okay. First of all, so a lot of people will ask us, how do I know if my business is a federal contractor required to post all these extra postings? So first of all, federal contractors can be in a variety of industries, and there are so many businesses today that might be covered by federal contractor posting requirements. It's actually changed a lot. In the recent years, we've seen the number of businesses grow that are covered by these federal contractor postings. And that's just because of developments in the economy and new government funding initiatives that really apply to more types of businesses. So, whereas it used to be something we would really just talk about for, construction, construction industry, or maybe defense contractors, in recent years we've seen federal contractor laws apply to, more and more kinds of businesses, especially in finance and banking, telecommunications, technology, education, transportation, and even a lot of nonprofit organizations. So there is not one easy definition as to whether you're considered a federal contractor for posting purposes, because each posting requirement is a little bit different. But on this slide, we've included a few questions that you can ask yourself that will help you determine if the posters apply to you. Basically, if the answer to any of these is yes, then you probably will require additional labor law posters. So first, does your business provide goods or services to the federal government or receive federal funding? And this is really the main question that covers most federal contractors, providing goods or services to the federal government or receiving federal funding. Next, has your business received federal funds under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009? The third question you can ask is whether your business does any work on federally financed construction projects. And then finally, is your business required to use E-Verify? And this one doesn't always mean you're a federal contractor, because a lot of states, I think there are about 9 states, that require employers to participate in E-Verify even if you're not a federal contractor. But I've included it here because federal contractors are required to participate in E-Verify, so a lot of the mandatory E-Verify participants are also federal contractors for purposes of all the other postings. And by the way, any business that participates in E-Verify, whether you're required or not, if you participate in E-Verify, you do have additional employee postings to display. So this is the list. These are the most common federal contractor posters that are required for federal contractors. And again, each posting requirement is different. So your specific posting obligations may depend on factors like the dollar amount of your contract or your federal funding, what agency you're working with, and the type of contract you have. We actually have written a great white paper on this with all the details. So if you need help determining which of these posters apply to your business, just indicate that in the question box, and we'll be happy to email you the white paper. It's a great reference tool that goes through each of the postings and all the legal definitions so you can determine which of these apply to your business. So as I said, in 2015, we've had several mandatory changes to the federal contractor postings, and as you can see on this list, near the end of the list, which ones had updates or which ones were new posters issued in 2015. And I am going to give you a little bit more detail on these in a moment. Okay, in general, the federal contractor posters, these actually tend to change a lot. They change a lot more frequently than the regular federal posters because the laws applying to federal contractors evolve very quickly as a result of executive orders. Like I said, we've already had 5 mandatory changes in 2015, and that's because executive orders are issued pretty quickly compared to your typical legislation that has to go through the House and the Senate or extended public comment periods. The executive orders are just issued by the President, and a lot of times they just pop up without much notice. Also, just like the regular federal and state posters we've been talking about, federal contractors are responsible for monitoring the posting changes on their own. There's no notice from the government or the contracting agency letting you know when these changes occur. Occasionally you'll get a notice through a contract itself, but there isn't any kind of blanket or global notice going out letting you know that new posters are out or that poster changes have occurred. And also, these federal contractor posters are really important to keep on top of because the penalties for noncompliance can be even worse. They're even more severe than what we see with the regular federal and state posters. So if a business doesn't comply with the federal contractor posting requirements, there are not only steep fines and increased exposure in employment litigation, just like with the regular federal and state postings, but another penalty for federal contractors is you can actually lose your government contract or funding. And you'll see that, typically it's written right into the contract that the contract can be suspended or canceled just because of noncompliance with the posting requirements. So the first poster change we're going to talk about is the federal contractor minimum wage poster. And this was actually a new posting requirement, a brand new poster that went into effect in January 2015 as part of a new executive order. The executive order was one that was signed by President Obama back in February 2014. And it was the executive order that established a new minimum wage rate for federal contractor employees. And the wage that went into effect back in January was $10.10 per hour. And it technically took effect for new contracts entered after January 1st and contracts that were extended or renewed after January 1st, where the new wage rate would go into effect on the contract renewal date. So this law applies to most federal contractors, but I've listed here the 4 kinds of contracts that are specifically covered, meaning an employee has to do work in connection with one or more of these kinds of contracts to be covered by the new minimum wage, to be entitled to the new minimum wage. And the federal contractor white paper that I mentioned goes into a lot more detail about these definitions, what these contracts are, in case you're not familiar with them. I know there are a lot of legal definitions and federal acts that are listed up here, but the white paper will explain that as well. Also, in this executive order, the order stated that every year on January 1st, the wage may be increased or adjusted as determined by the Secretary of Labor. And that did occur for 2016. So the new rate for 2016, for January 2016, has already been announced. And the new rate has been increased to $10.15 per hour. And there's also a new mandatory poster notifying employees of the increase. This poster actually came out in September, just a few months ago. And on this slide, we have the image of the new poster. And so again, this poster replaces the old one. And just to recap, there was a brand new poster issued in January 2015, and then a mandatory update released in September. Okay, next we had 2 mandatory changes that came out around the same time in February 2015. And these poster changes were the result of another executive order signed by President Obama. And this was a new law that was designed to help eliminate human trafficking by government contractors and subcontractors. And the law was also intended to strengthen employee whistleblower rights, protection for whistleblowing. So one of the changes was a mandatory update to the existing poster, the Department of Defense Fraud Hotline poster. And then the second change was actually a new mandatory poster that was issued. It was released, and it's called the Department of Defense, the DoD Whistleblower poster. The Fraud Hotline poster informs employees of the Department of Defense Fraud Hotline phone number and also how to anonymously report any kind of fraud, waste, or abuse relating to any kind of DoD funding or project. And the new whistleblower poster, it informs employees that they're protected from any kind of retaliation. They can't be discriminated against, terminated, disciplined, etc., if they report any wrongdoing by their employer relating to any DoD funding. So both of these notices have to be posted by federal contractors if you have any contracts with the Department of Defense that exceed $5 million. And the next change that I want to talk about is the new EEO is the Law supplement that was recently released by the U.S. Department of Labor. This is the same one I mentioned earlier when we were talking about pending changes to the federal EEO is the law poster. And this new poster supplement for federal contractors was just issued in September 2015. And just to recap, the new supplemental poster reflects a number of regulatory changes that are sort of old, going back to 2014, and including the new law prohibiting gender identity and sexual orientation that just went into effect in April, but also the expanded protection for veterans and individuals with disabilities that went into effect back in 2014. So it really incorporates a lot of changes that have occurred over the years through different executive orders. And this supplemental posting is mandatory. So if you're a federal contractor, you should already have this one up as part of your posting display. Just to clarify, this posting is considered a temporary supplemental posting. And it is going to soon be replaced by a final version once the agency updates are complete and released. And this is the one where the OFCCP announced that it's working closely with the EEOC to create that final version, and the announcement stated that the new poster is expected to be out in early 2016. So this is the one that we know will be required for federal contractors, but we're still waiting and watching to see if it's also going to be a mandatory update required for all employers. Since the poster, the EEO is the law poster that's being revised, is not just for federal contractors. It's actually for, as I explained before, it's a general poster required for employers, where most of the poster talks about general obligations against discrimination, and only a little piece of the poster is dedicated to the federal contractor requirements. So we're still watching that to see if it's going to be an update for everyone. Okay, there was another mandatory poster released for federal contractors in September, just a few months ago. And this is actually a required posting for 2016. And it's the Pay Transparency Policy Statement. This posting came out of an executive order that you probably heard about. It's a law that essentially prohibits federal contractors from terminating or discriminating in any way against employees or applicants for inquiring about, discussing, or disclosing their own compensation or the compensation of another employee or applicant. So in other words, this law says you cannot retaliate against employees for sharing information about their salary or wages. Like I said, the posting is already out, but the law really goes into effect for new contracts or contract renewals starting after January 11th, 2016. Okay, so we've already covered 2 federal contractor postings that are already out for 2016. That's the Pay Transparency Policy Statement and the 2016 minimum wage poster. But there are also some additional poster changes that are expected for 2016 based on laws that have already been passed. So this slide highlights pending poster changes based on federal laws that have already been enacted, laws that make the corresponding posters outdated and in need of updates so that they remain accurate for employees to learn about their rights. So just to clarify this on this slide, this is just a list of laws that have already been passed with actual effective dates. There's a host of other bills that are pending right now in various stages of legislation that could also affect the federal contractor posters. And those are on issues like immigration reform and FMLA expansions. There's some pretty drastic proposals out there. But with those, there's just so much uncertainty about them and around the timing, so we didn't include them on the slide here. So as far as these pending changes, the first is the EEO is the law poster that we've been talking about, where the temporary supplement was issued and we're waiting for that final poster to come out in early 2016. Then there are the next 3 on this list are federal contractor posters that are expected to change because of the 2016 minimum wage increase. And these are the Walsh-Healy Public Contracts Act, Service Contract Act posting, the Notice to Workers with Disabilities posting, and the Davis-Bacon Act poster. And all 3 of these posters reference the minimum wage. So they still reference the regular federal minimum wage. And they haven't yet been updated to include the increased rate for federal contractors, that $10.15 that goes into effect in January. And then finally, last on this list, we're expecting a new poster based on another executive order signed by President Obama on September 7th, 2015. And this is another one you may have heard of. It's the new paid sick leave law, and this is one that requires federal contractors and subcontractors to give their employees up to 7 days or 56 hours of paid sick leave every year. And for this one, the Secretary of Labor has until next September 2016, to issue the final regulations on how to implement the law. So that's a poster that we're expecting around that time, around September 2016. But like we talked about before, you never know, it could come out a few months before that, or a few months after that. Okay. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Raquel to talk about the city and county postings and all the changes that we've seen in that area in 2015.
All right. I'm going to give you a very quick overview of some of the major city and county posting changes in 2015. Now, this is a new trend that we've been watching, but just because it's new, I mean, the number of city and counties requiring employers to post notices is really booming. Almost daily, our legal team, including myself, are analyzing new legislation and ordinances and determining whether they require mandatory postings and adding them to our offerings. In fact, we've actually just added another lawyer to our legal team just to focus on these city requirements, and that just shows you how much growth we're seeing in this area. The city and county postings cover employment laws similar to the state posters. Cities have the discretion to pass laws that offer more protection to employees than state or federal law. One question we get a lot is whether you have to post the city posters in addition to the state and federal. So let's see. For example, let's say your city has a minimum wage poster and the minimum wage is higher than the state or federal. Do you have to still post the state and the federal postings? And the answer is yes. The reason is because sometimes the laws cover different employees and these legal differences can be small, but you still have to post all three even if they seem to conflict. This slide shows a list of some of the major changes we had to city postings in 2015. Now, as you can see, the cities have followed the same trends we have seen on the state level, especially when it comes to paid sick leave laws. First, there's San Francisco, California. They increased their minimum wage to $12.25 an hour. And, actually in San Francisco, there are now 7 mandatory posters. So that means there are a total of 28 mandatory posters for San Francisco employers, if you include all of the federal and state posters too. Next, we have San Jose, Berkeley, Mountain View, Richmond, and Sunnyvale, California, and they all increased their minimum wages in 2015. Emeryville, California also enacted the minimum wage and paid sick leave ordinance, which provides for a higher citywide minimum wage and additional paid sick leave provisions than required by the state of California. This new law went into effect on July 2nd, 2015. Chicago, Illinois also enacted a new minimum wage ordinance that provides for a series of step increases that started in July 2015. And then there's the state of New Jersey. Now, multiple cities in New Jersey, and these cities include Trenton, Montclair, East Orange, Bloomfield, Passaic, and Patterson. They all had paid sick leave laws required, which required new posters in 2015. The next cities are Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Las Cruces, and Bernalillo County, New Mexico, who also increased their minimum wages in 2015. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania enacted the Promoting Healthy Family and Workplaces Ordinance in 2015, which requires employers with 10 or more employees to provide them with up to 1 hour of paid sick time for every 40 hours worked. The next city is Seattle, Washington, and they increased their minimum wage in 2015, which also resulted in a poster change. Now, remember, we're just highlighting some of the recent developments in 2015. There are a lot of other cities and counties that require posters, but of course we don't have the time to get into all of them. Again, these are just some of the major ones that we saw in 2015. But if you'd like more information about the city posting requirements, just send us a request and we'll follow up with you to talk about your specific location. Okay, let's see, where are we? Okay, so we've talked about posters that actually had changes in 2015, but there are also some city-county laws that have passed, but the posters are not out yet. There's so much local legislation out there affecting these posting requirements, but this slide just highlights some posters we're watching for changes based on laws that have already been enacted, and they need to be updated to incorporate the changes. There are also a couple of new laws that were recently enacted where the posters have already been released for 2016. This slide just highlights those posters. Again, these are where the laws go into effect in January 2016, and the posters have already been released. So for California, we have Oakland, Mountain View, and Richmond. They all increased their minimum wages for 2016, and the posters were already released. The effective dates for these postings are January 1st, 2016. Portland, Maine also increased its minimum wage effective January 1st, 2016. Next city is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and they enacted a paid sick time ordinance, and this law was effective January 11th, 2016, and that poster has already been released. But this law is effective by a pending lawsuit, so actually the effective date has been pushed back to March 10th, 2016. So again, for this posting, the poster has already been released, but the effective date has been pushed back to March 10th of next year. Okay, so that's all for our city and county postings. So now Ashley is going to cover another trend that's really hot right now.
Okay, thank you. It looks like I have there might be a technical difficulty here, so I'm just going to ask our host, Stephanie, to jump in if you can. I did want to do a poll question, but maybe Stephanie can give us the results once you submit your answers. But the question has to do with our next trend.
I got it.
And the question is, how does your business manage remote worker posting compliance? And by remote workers, we're talking about any employees who work off-site, either whether they work from home or out in the field. We're talking about employees who don't report to a company-owned facility where you have your posters up on the walls. So please take a moment to submit your answers. For your remote workers, do you A, mail them the posters, B, use an electronic solution, C, do nothing, which means not providing the notices at all, or D, it doesn't apply? And I'll let Stephanie let us know what the results are.
Hey, Ashley. Well, it looks like the majority of you all says you answered does not apply to our business, with 57% of you.
Okay, great. So I am going to get into the laws, the legal requirements around this for remote workers in just a moment for those of you who do have remote workers. But first, I wanted to tell you, and just back up for a moment, and tell you about a posting compliance solution that takes care of all these changes that we've been talking about today, including for your physical facilities, your wall posters for your physical facilities, as well as remote workers. Because of the complexity involved in keeping up with all the posters, the rate of change, and all the severity of the penalties for noncompliance, we've developed a solution to help our customers stay on the right side of the law when it comes to posting compliance, and that is Poster Guard Compliance Protection. So I realize that some of you might not be familiar with Poster Guard or the Compliance Protection Service, so I'm just going to give a real high-level overview of how it works. So basically the way the service works is we start you out by sending all the mandatory federal and state labor law posters to all of your locations, and then once you get your initial postings, we take care of everything from there. Our in-house legal team is monitoring the posters daily for changes and doing all the interpretation and analysis whenever there's a change. And whenever there is a mandatory change, we immediately notify you and automatically send out a complete new poster at no additional charge with all the mandatory updates on the poster. And that is, no matter how many changes there are throughout a year, we just keep moving. The most I've seen since I've been managing posting compliance, in one single state, 1 year, we saw 14 changes. But it really depends on the state. Some only get a couple of changes in a year, others get 5 or 6 or more. But with PosterGuard, you don't have to worry about keeping track of any of it. We're doing all that for you. So by the way, because I have seen some questions that came in, for those of you who are already PosterGuard customers, your locations should have already received all the federal and state poster updates that we've talked about today. So you shouldn't have to worry about anything we've talked about for 2015. The only thing that you might need to do is make sure that you have all of the services you need for your business. For example, if you need the federal contractor service, you need to let us know that. Or if you want to add city and county posting services for some of your locations, you would need to let us know that. And then just one of the benefits of PosterGuard is that we do have a 100% compliance guarantee where we cover any government posting fines. So, if you're a PosterGuard customer and you get any kind of government posting fine when you've displayed our most recent materials, we take full responsibility for that fine. And this slide, just quickly, it lists some of our add-on services beyond the basic federal and state coverage that we offer. We've talked about most of these. I just wanted to also mention Canada and then some industry-specific posting requirements. And then also on this slide, I've included all the different formats, and that's really just because there are so many unique needs, in the way that employers are employing their workforce today in terms of different languages, people working from home, people working in non-traditional work sites without walls. There are solutions for that as well. And one of the things just to mention, I did include up here about fully translated postings. One of the things that's unique about PosterGuard, if there's a poster that has to be posted in a foreign language for everyone, we go ahead and include that with our English service. So that's something we're researching, and compliance is our priority. So if that's something that's required for everyone, we are going to go ahead and include that. You don't need to know or to ask for that. And that is the case right now in 22 states. Employers have to post certain posters in Spanish even if you have no Spanish-speaking employees. So that's something we research and do for you. And then on the next slide, I just wanted to mention another feature of PosterGuard, especially for businesses that have locations in multiple states. We make it really easy for you to manage all your locations. We have a members-only web portal where you can see all your account activity. You get information about posting changes. You can see full images of all the posters, for easy auditing. And you can also track your poster shipments. We use UPS, so you can just, with one click, you can see exactly where the posters are or who signed for them. So we also have a notification program, so you'll get an email with a heads up, letting you know that a poster is changing, what the poster change is, and when it's shipping. So you'll always be ahead of the curve. Okay, and then we're just going to close with some more information about how to comply with all the posting requirements if you do have remote workers or any off-site employees. So, and this is really a growing trend. We're starting, it's not really starting. We're continuing to see more and more businesses employ workers from home or out in the field. And for these employees, for years, we here at PosterGuard, the legal team has gotten questions from customers saying, we have employees who work from home. What should we do? Should we be mailing them the posters? And we've always kind of laughed, trying to imagine an employee sitting at home with these big posters up on the refrigerator or their bathroom wall. And you certainly can do that as one way to comply, but obviously that wouldn't work for everyone, and that is not required by law. But it is kind of confusing because by law you are required to communicate the information that's provided in these mandatory federal and state notices, but the regulations don't tell us exactly how you're supposed to do that. There's nothing that says you have to do it, whether it's paper or electronic. There are some court cases and some recent opinion letters, however, that talk about employers who have sent them electronically given their employees electronic access to the postings. And courts have said that is a good alternative. That meets the underlying intent of the law, so that is a compliant solution. So to help our customers comply when it comes to these employees, we have developed an electronic posting solution. And it basically pushes out the mandatory notices directly to your remote workers via email. So again, we're doing it all for you. Essentially, we just take the email address. You provide the email addresses of your remote workers, and we take it from there. And this is called our e-service for remote workers. And just to clarify, this is not a substitute for wall postings. There are a few postings that the agencies have said could be posted electronically as a substitute, but in general, the law still requires you to display all the physical posters at your physical facilities. So again, this electronic solution that I'm telling you about is just for your employees who are off-site and don't have access to the physical posters on your walls. For your employees with internet access, and they need to have either computers or a mobile device where they can access the email. So for those employees, it's a fully compliant solution. And this next slide just shows the way that it works. Like I said, you provide us with the email, and then we send an initial email to the employee welcoming them, enrolling them, and it has a link to the posters. We host all the poster images, and the legal team keeps them up to date at all times. And then the employee is prompted to view and download the posting images, and then to acknowledge that they've done so. And we do this every time there's a mandatory change. We do this again automatically. So this is really great because it gives you full tracking of all the dates and times when your employees have acknowledged the posters. It's something that we maintain for 5 years. It's fully accessible on the web portal, on the members-only web portal. And I can just tell you from experience as an employment attorney that this really comes in handy. Whenever you're in a dispute, employees will say, well, I didn't know about that, or I didn't receive that policy or that update. And in this case, you have the record keeping and to back you that you did what you needed to do to stay in compliance. And then just finally, we have also seen a growing trend where a lot of companies have work sites without walls. We see it a lot with mobile service units, sort of like an office on wheels. We see it especially in healthcare where there are so many mobile services like MRI units, kidney dialysis, blood donation trailers, and then another example are just food trucks. So in these cases, employees aren't necessarily, they're not provided with computers or internet access, but they still have to have access to all the same federal and state notices as your other employees. But when there are no walls and no internet connection or computers or devices provided, that can present a whole other challenge. So in this case, we've developed another solution, and that's it's a binder format. So it's just a 2-ring binder where all the postings are included, and it can either be hung or put on a shelf. And whenever mandatory updates occur, we send the pages that need to be replaced. So that makes it really easy. So this is something, like I mentioned, we see for mobile service units, but it's also something where a lot of customers have asked for this and other kinds of non-traditional work sites like mall kiosks, valet stations. Also, if you have a business where your employees are performing services on another company's property, like we've seen it with janitorial services, for example, where the employees just sort of have a checkpoint where they go to get their supplies. Maybe it's a closet or a storage area, but there's not a dedicated area with walls for the posters. Okay, that wraps it up. I think we may have gone over, but if I'll turn it back over to Stephanie if maybe we have time for some questions. If not, we will follow up with you. Any questions that have been submitted, we will be following up with you. But in the meantime, if you'd like any more information about anything that we've talked about, please feel free to contact our compliance specialist, Sarah Santiago, at 954-970-5533, or you can reach Sarah by email at ssantiago@postregard.com.
Thank you, Ashley and Raquel. Yes, I think we have time for one or two questions just because, we received a lot of them. We want to answer one or two. And then for the rest of the questions, like Ashley said, we will follow up with you via email. So if you didn't have a chance to get your question in, now is the time. The first question, Ashley, is from Peter about determining the number of posters. He says, we have several buildings on our campus and one is a high-rise with multiple floors. How do we know how many poster sets we need?
Okay, that's actually a question that we get all the time, and I wish there was some kind of formula to help answer that. And I know lawyers are famous for saying it depends. But the main thing that you need to make sure that in order to comply is that the poster, this is the legal standard that each poster has its own standard, its own language. But the main gist of it is that the posters have to be displayed in conspicuous locations that are readily accessible to all your employees. So it really depends on the layout of your facility. I've had clients where in a high-rise building, if all your employees have to go through one kind of central entrance or they share a central employee area, you might be okay with one posting display site. However, if there are a lot of different entrances or employees can go straight to their workplace without pretty much barely ever going through a break room or a certain hallway, then you may need to post on every single floor. Same thing with, there are some corporate campuses that are spread out where, you need to make sure that the employees have regular access to the posters. If it's, in a break room that half your employees would never use because it's in a separate building or a separate, area, then that's not going to cut it.
All right, I think that should answer that question. That's great. I think we can move on to one final question, and this is from Tanya, who asks, we have a remote worker who comes in a few times a year for meetings. Would that still be considered a remote worker when it comes to postings?
Okay, did you say a few times a year or a few times a month?
Oh, I'm sorry, a few times a month.
Okay, a few times a month. Again, this is one where I wish there was a formula that I could say if employee comes in X number of times per year or month, then that satisfies the requirements. We have researched this a lot because it comes up a lot, and the best we can find is the Department of Labor and the EEOC have sort of commented and answered specific questions from employers on this, and the published answer had to do with someone's question where the employee came into the office once a week, and the employer was asking, is that enough where they could see the wall posters, or do we need to send them something electronically? And the DOL answered, well, if it's once a week, that's enough, you're fine. You can just post your posters. So given that information, we sort of use that as our standard. If it's about once a week, then your posters on your walls are going to be enough. That would suffice. If it's once or twice a year, then no, you need some kind of other solution to get the posting notices out to them. If it's somewhere in between, if you only have employees coming in once a month, I would really talk to your legal counsel. I would be more conservative. I would tend to be more conservative and just get the notices electronically to those employees. But it depends on your compliance culture. If it's less than once a month, I would say you would definitely want some kind of other way to communicate the posting notices to your employees.
Great. Thank you, guys. We are over time, so that is all the time we have for questions today. I do want to remind you, all the questions that you submitted, we will follow up with you on that. If you ask your question, Ashley will get back to you, and that should be by the end of the week. Before we sign off today, I would like to invite you to next month's webinar by Comply Right, and that will be on January 12th, 2016 at 2 p.m. Eastern, the top 10 compliance landmines to watch out for in 2016. While we don't have a crystal ball, we do have a keen understanding of the legal issues that are likely to heat up in 2016. As Ashley had mentioned before with this webinar, join us next month for an insightful overview of the 10 employment law matters every employer should be watching now. You'll also receive direction of the best strategies and practices for reducing risk and keeping your business compliant. You can sign up for this webinar on complyright.com. This was an informative session today, and I thank all of you for staying on with us during the hour and past the hour. Thank you, Ashley and Raquel, for presenting, and everyone, have a great day.